Finally, then casuals would no longer taint the sanctity of our games, where only the real gamers will finally prove themselves. We don't want anyone with such loser mentality to even touch our game. Can't even beat a boss in hologram of the lowest difficulty? Think that this game is hard? If you think that for a second, that means you're just a pathetic loser. We don't want your kind. You know what the truth is? It's just excuses. Go play your little farming simulator. That's where you belong. I heard there's a good one people are talking about. I think it's called Genshin Impact. Imagine saying that you're playing a game and it turns out it's some sort of scam called Genshin Impact. Couldn't be us Wuwa players. Hey, before we go and play a real game, let me give you some words of wisdom. Genshin could never. So this is what it feels like to be a madman when the hype is going a bit hard. Not gonna lie, kind of fun. So yeah, anyway, looks like we're starting the countdown to the release of Wuthering Waves. The waiting game is almost over, everyone. What a journey. Seriously, a crazy one at that. That said, there's one more thing I want to talk about for this game, and it's about to get a little bit spicy. So, after reading some of the comments from my last video on Wuba, I got to thinking about what people actually think about what Wuthering Waves would be like for casuals and hardcore audiences. By the way, I also want to say thank you for the comments. It was fascinating to see different sides of the discussion regarding Wuba's combat and just gacha game combat in general. It also gives me more ideas for future videos like this one. So please like and subscribe if you want to see more random analyses like the previous video or my overall gacha game review analysis. Anyway, what I want to talk about is the very concept of having a casual experience and a hardcore experience for Wuthering Waves. You see, in a way, Wuthering Waves does seem to come off as a game that appeals to the hardcore audience, and by extension could be potentially off-putting to the casuals. There are some conversations going on about the fact that there are people out there who simply aren't looking for a hardcore experience. And to that end, there seems to be a massive divide between casuals and hardcore, where people would ideally have two games that is designed for these two categories of people. Like casuals would have a home in Genshin and hardcore would have a home in Wuwa. Then there's also the case where there are times when I've been told if a gacha game wants to make money, you must at some point appeal to the casuals, even for a game like Wuthering Waves. From what I've generally seen sometimes, within that same argument, it's that appealing to the casuals would sometimes imply that some of the content should probably be made easier or minimal to a certain degree. And in a way, this sentiment kind of rubs me the wrong way for Wuba. Now, I'm all for Kuro making some mad dosh, but here's the thing. I would say that Wuthering Waves shouldn't appeal to the casuals. Rather, they should have mechanics that cater to the casuals. But it appears that they are already doing that anyway. Let me explain. Currently, it appears that there's this imaginary gate that cuts both the casual and hardcore experiences off from each other. An argument can be made that it's not necessarily the case, but it certainly feels as if we're working with two extremes. The point is that there should be a gray area that connects the two experiences that bring a level of cohesiveness within a game's design. I believe that the casual experience should be a platform that sets the stage for the player to be eased into gaining the opportunity to choose to try out the hardcore experience by having them develop the tools and skills that are adequate enough to tackle it. It can't be overbearing, but it shouldn't be separate. Part of a satisfying journey should be to put in your efforts for development in your skills or your characters only to have it all pay off in front of you. This can be for anything, not just Wuthering Waves. Whether you're building a settlement for farming or just trying to kill a hard boss. All of it doesn't come down to having a hardcore or casual experience. It should come down to having an experience. You see, I'm not saying that a casual experience should necessarily be hard. Rather, I feel that the casual experience should have an organic way to help them truly understand and even love the game. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh, so you mean a tutorial? In a way, yes. Well, it's in the same way in how Monster Hunter World's tutorial ends after you beat the entire main story. At that point, you should be able to grasp about 60% of the mechanics and at least recognize that the other 40% exists but is not necessarily needed to be used unless you really want to use it. Fortunately, Wuthering Waves isn't stock filled to the brim with the many mechanics that Monster Hunter offers, and to a certain extent, it's much more digestible in general. I mean, it's a gacha game after all, right? Regardless, when it comes to interfacing with the mechanics of the game, we generally absorb the basics of the combat and passively grow to understand its depth. But this doesn't happen on its own, and in a way, it isn't necessarily foolproof as you can choose to dodge and basic attack the whole way through. But when faced with a challenge that creates friction in your journey, it's only natural to adapt and find a way to smoothen out the edges. But that's only if you're ever placed in that scenario, and it also depends on what that challenge would entail. For the case of Monster Hunter World, we can see that weapon depth and builds are concepts that are inevitable to learn. For Wuthering Waves, among other things, it's probably going to be maximizing the character core passives. In PGR, they do a good job in executing this, as there are various challenges that eases you into team building and using the characters to their full potential, especially when it comes to the Phantom Pain Cage and Warzone. The expectation isn't for you to get the highest score, the expectation is for you to clear the content. Even if you're engaging with the game on the surface, you'll end up picking up certain mechanics from within PGR's combat. Now, when it comes to the hardcore experience, you can probably try for a higher score. I mean, after all, you'll get more reward currencies for upgrades and other stuff, but by then, you'll probably be incentivized in, let's say, for instance, learning your character rotation to maximize your full team's potential. Another good example of being eased into a challenge aside from Phantom Pain Cage and Warzone are story boss fight challenge events that pop up, which comes with increasingly harder difficulties, where each difficulty adds a mechanic until it reaches its final form. Sound familiar? And yeah, there's some reward side to them, but it's not a big deal considering PGR is somewhat generous in giving out their limited tickets, and it's worth mentioning that the highest difficulty just gives minor rewards and a trophy to show off that you cleared it, which pretty much gives you an idea of how Kuro generally operates for this game. And I'm pretty sure the same can be said for WUWA. Going back to PP Cage and Warzone, which are the core components of PGR's endgame, what's interesting is that even if you don't maximize the amount of rewards you get from it, the amount you get, even if you're not trying, is acceptable. That said, it should open the doors wide open for any casual out there to tackle content like Babel Tower or other harder content if they feel like it. But for the most part, it appears that through the gameplay of PGR and how the content is designed, the lines between hardcore and casual can be blurred. And also, in a way, it should make us consider how we define casuals in PGR and also other games like WUWA or Genshin. We'll touch on that later. For now, I just want to bring up another example from a game that I really enjoy, Blue Archive. Yeah, the cute and funny one. There's actually some challenging content in there, and some content where I ended up molding in. In Blue Archive, the way progression works feels very organic, where transitioning from being a casual player to engaging with some of the more challenging and hardcore content feels rather seamless. You see, when starting out in Blue Archive, you'll find yourself autoing your way to the victory screen. But when you progress even further, you might find some minor roadblocks that are nothing groundbreaking, but something that can't exactly be ignored. This might encourage the player to change things up little by engaging with some of the mechanics. Eventually, the player will most likely learn about team composition, positioning, element weaknesses, specific character roles and abilities, and EX skill usage and cycling. At that point, if the player ever decides to tackle the endgame content like Total Assault, which are basically this game's boss raids, and Joint Firing Drill, which are the unique challenge modes, they'll already be equipped with the know-how on how to tackle it without feeling gated off. Unless it's a roster check, then that's a different story. What's interesting is that both Total Assault and Joint Firing Drill has lower difficulties, with toned down mechanics, which also help ease the player into getting used to the mechanics and working their way up to more challenging difficulties. Sound familiar? Much like boss challenges in PGR, this is, yet again, an example of easing the casuals into having the option to engage with the higher difficulty content. So what about the hardcore content in Blue Archive? Well, there's scores tied to these endgame content, and getting the highest possible score is completely optional for the most part. That said, Blue Archive does have a hardcore activity, which is the Torment difficulty in Total Assault, which is just a straight up evil difficulty where not a lot of people are able to complete. But that's okay. What's interesting is that for both games, casuals would already be equipped not necessarily with the characters, but with the knowledge they need to be able to attempt the content. So when they have the desire to at least try it out, the door is opened. This, to me, is the perfect balance in catering to the casuals, while also maintaining the integrity of the hardcore experience by creating a bridge of a seamless experience from one end to the other. Basically, when it comes to balancing the casual and hardcore experience, neither are hindered for the sake of each other. Instead, both take advantage of the core components of the game to enhance both sides. Going back to Wuthering Waves, if it wasn't clear already, it appears that this design methodology exists to some extent. You may have heard how the world bosses out there were considered to be quite the pushovers. I mean, the crownless gets tossed into the air like a ragdoll most of the time. You see, They're actually the precursor for what's to come in the endgame activity holograms. These world bosses are pretty much baked into the progression of the game, and it's interesting how they have their own reprised version in the form of holograms. And would you look at that, the holograms have the same concept as the other two examples. And I'm only talking about holograms here. If I talked about the other two endgame modes, we'd be here all day. But let's talk about another issue. It seems that the concept of hardcore is beginning to conflate its identity with challenging, and casual is being conflated with super easy don't care. And even I'm susceptible to thinking that way. The truth is that the kind of people casual and hardcore audiences are, and want, varies from game to game. Sure, they may have similar characteristics, but they operate differently. The hardcore audience in WoWa aren't the only people who are tackling the holograms. If anything, normal players go at it as well, and some of them could be casual players. Usually the hardcore players are the no-hit runners, fast time clearers, or high damage number farmers. Much like how in HSR, there are hardcore players who go for zero cycle runs, while at the same time, there are just normal players who simply want to clear MOC. In general, there is no expectation for us to do a no-hit run or get the fastest time. And even for the casuals case, I'm convinced that they want to play more of the game beyond, just checking things out. What truly defines casuals and how they interact with the game comes from the issue with time being something that they do not have to spare. But the situation of time can be remedied through the quality of life mechanics and changes like sweeps or quick clears. PGR and Blue Archive has that, especially for the harder challenges. Just clear once and sweep the rest. Even HSR has an auto battle function, which is still more time consuming compared to the sweeps, but still a good QOL mechanic. The way we view casual and hardcore experiences should vary from game to game, but in no way should be what shapes the direction of the game. It's the direction of the game that should shape the casual and hardcore experiences. Kuro knows what Wuthering Waves is and should be. They have no obligation to the casuals, but the same can be said for the fact that they also have no obligation to the hardcore audience as well. That said, appealing to the casuals is honestly stupid, because that's just not Wuthering Waves, but that doesn't necessarily mean ignore the casuals. The point I'm getting at is that Wuthering Waves should strive to craft a fulfilling experience that allows their players to have the option to seamlessly transition to more challenging content if they wanted to. And who knows, maybe they'll be knee deep into the game and perhaps attempt a no-hit run. And if not, that's just as fine. At the beginning of the video, I made it seem like there was this disdain against the casual player base, like there was a preconceived idea that perhaps it's the casual's fault that a game's experience could stagnate, or that the challenges of a game are eroding due to them. I mean, I'm sure most of us are drawing examples from that one game that starts with a G, but in truth, I simply think that this perception is warped, and that there is definitely a place for casuals to exist at no cost to the hardcore experience, especially in a gacha game. And honestly, that's the crux of this video. All of this talk about Wuthering Waves is going to compete against Genshin, or Hoyoverse is scared of WoWa or whatever is just strange to me. The reality is that Wuthering Waves is a different game. Sure, there are some similarities that Kuro is trying to hit which parallels to Genshin's open world design, which, in my opinion, really falls short by comparison, but when we look at the core gameplay, it's vastly different. What these games should be doing, and to a certain extent are already doing, is that they should double down on what they are and fully embrace their identity and design philosophy. I'd rather they not appeal to everyone, especially when I believe that a game for everyone is a game for no one. And let's get this straight, Genshin isn't clearly for everyone. Certainly not for me. Whether it be the art or story, combat, or even the lack of challenging content that appeals to casuals, the truth is, it's not for everyone. Even Hoyoverse has confirmed where their values lie for Genshin, which led to the game becoming an environment where the hardcore player base just would not be able to thrive. And in the same vein, WoWa isn't for everyone as well. Though they provide an environment for the hardcore player base to expand into, not everyone can play Dark Souls, not everyone can perfect dodge or parry, and that's okay. And when we talk about art and story, maybe that won't appeal to everyone either. What matters is how they capitalize on what they are. That said, I want to talk about what I'm afraid of, which is what people value within certain character kits in these many tier lists that are scattered throughout the web. The attack buffs and whatever for combat efficiency is fine and all, but when it comes to characters who heal and shield, there's this sentiment that these characters are very valuable. What's scary isn't the existence of a heal or shield, what's scary is how effective they could be. You see, in PGR, overshields and healing exist to a certain extent, but you can still bite the dust even if you heavily rely on them. Because they can be strong, but not strong enough to turn you into an immortal god, or at the very least cost you your overall DPS, which could fail you in some challenges. For Wuthering Waves, an argument can be made where strong healing and shields would help casuals along the way, but I think they only serve to hurt the game overall. Players naturally gravitate towards the path with the least resistance, and if the value of healing and shielding is too high, it might spell trouble for the game. Look, I'm not against heals or shields or even CC. As far as I know, Variana can save you from getting one-shot once every 10 minutes, which some people overblow that kind of value, when in reality it's just a chance to cover a mistake that a player might make. So what's the point? How do heals and shields get balanced to where it still helps casuals but at the same time doesn't hurt the foundation of the game? Simple. Have heals and shields be mechanics that are forgiving but not necessarily game-changing. They should exist only to cover some of your careless mistakes, like minor heals that can give you a health pool that allows you to take on an extra hit, or a one-time only res that can help you if you screw up big time in your big moment, or even shields where you aren't confident that you can parry 4 times in a row. I know this video with my takes will be lost in the void whether you disagree or not, and that's okay. If the issues I've talked about don't come to pass, it's a win in my book. Besides, what I enjoy are discussing these ideas with others, but really I still want to drive the point home that there's a lot of nuance surrounding casuals and hardcore and where they stand in our games. At the end of the day, casuals walk at a different pace, and we should accept that, as long as it doesn't come at the cost of others. So yeah, Wuthering Waves is right over the horizon, and it's been a crazy journey for those who have been following the game since its initial announcement and tiny promo video by Vanguard Sound Studio. Wuthering Waves seems to be hailing a new era of gacha games, and honestly, I couldn't be more excited for other games like Azure Pamelia and Do It Night Abyss. That said, when WoW launches, I'll be going all in for the game, and I'll be making a Wuthering Waves review analysis like I did for PGR. So please like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like that, or random gaming shenanigans I get up to. Anyway, I hope you all get to enjoy the game, and not only that, best of luck to you all for your gacha rolls. Oh yeah, as per tradition in these Wuthering Waves videos, I need to talk about Jinshi, of course. Well, this time it's easy, not that it was ever hard, but we got some drip marketing on Jinshi, so yeah, there you have it. Looks like I'm not going to roll for any 5-star before her banner. Time to do some hardcore saving.